Hello, y'all. Welcome back to the BirthFit podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Lindsay Matthews Cantu. I'm the founder and CEO of BirthFit for all of those that are new here or maybe listening to the first time, to the podcast for the first time. BirthFit has been around a while. We started as a blog and then evolved into seminars. And with the shenanigans of DVOC, then you know that all businesses had to adjust in 2020. And now 99% of BirthFit lives online, unless you are lucky enough to have a BirthFit leader or BirthFit coach in your area that teaches local classes, like I do with my business partner, Dr. Bria Much and Emily Stanwyck here in New Braunfels, Texas, the Texas Hill Country. So I'd encourage you to look at our BirthFit directory to see if there's anyone near you, if you can attend those local classes. If not, we got you online. We got you in the virtual space. We have B Community, which is our community of fitness, education, and connection. It is general strength and conditioning. And then we've got virtual support groups, Q&A, support chats, guest speakers, all kinds of good stuff happening in that group. And that would be where you would want to be if you were in the preconception or open to conception chapter of your life. We also have prenatal programs. We have the BirthFit Basics, which is all body weight and walking, because walking is so yummy, period, but it's so great during pregnancy. And that's a really great option to start with if you are newer to fitness, newer to training. And then we have the BirthFit Prenatal Training Program, which is general strength and conditioning. And it's very intentional. 4 days a week of training. You will get a full body workout each day with a start and focus on breath work, how our diaphragm and pelvic floor connect, and a really solid training day that is intentional and like intentional training for birth. We're not just modifying the WOD of the day or what's ever, on tap for your burn boot camp class or any of those. We also have the best postpartum timeline, the best postpartum package that starts with a lying in period. And I would just get the BirthFit postpartum package because it has everything from lying in to the BirthFit basics to the BirthFit postpartum training. The lying in has one video a day that could be more of a meditation, visualization, going into rehab, intentional breathing, postural work, things like that. Then we progress into the basics specifically programmed for postpartum and building up volume and stability in those movements and poses, and then progressing on to BirthFit postpartum training, which is a general strength and conditioning training program with progressive overload, tempo work, unilateral, asymmetrical work. And that's designed for any athlete, any person that wants to go back to their sport of choice, whether it be running, CrossFit, Orange Theory, volleyball, soccer, whatever. I guarantee this whole postpartum package will leave you feeling a lot more grounded, a lot more stable, and with a solid foundation of core work, stability work to go on and live your life. You will take the principles that you learn in these programs, you will take the basics with you and have a really solid foundation and sustainable kind of fitness mindset to really approach any kind of workout fitness modality that you choose. So, jump in there. As always, this podcast is not medical advice. It is education, information for you to do with it what you want. And, it is designed, as I always say, to promote freedom and choice in your life, to give you tools and other perspectives and a different lens by which to take on a certain fork in the road or obstacle in your life. I want this podcast to bring you more freedom throughout, the entire motherhood transition, whether that be preconception, pregnancy, postpartum, in between kiddos, and beyond. We're definitely focused on women's health and motherhood here, but all of these topics, I guarantee, can be applied to so much more beyond that. Some of you might say, "Well, what's beyond this?" Maybe nothing. I don't know, but there's so much good stuff in these podcasts. All right, so today we have an awesome guest on, and her name is Allie Miller. She is an RD and LD CDE, so a lot of initials behind her name. She's a registered dietitian with a naturopathic background and a contagious passion for using nutrients and food as the foundation of treatment protocols and programs. She is the author of an international bestseller, The Anti-Anxiety Diet, as well as the Anti-Anxiety Diet Cookbook and Naturally Nourished, Food as Medicine for Optimal Health. She'll be joining us in just a bit, so I'll ramble on a little bit more about her. Um, Allie is phenomenal, and I've met her in person, and I'm so glad she's coming on the podcast. She, I would say, is a dear friend of mine, even though we've only been friends for a short time, but connected, values like aligned. We even went to some local Wimberley meetings together because she lives out here in Wimberley now. And, Allie has a food as medicine philosophy, and it's supported by up-to-date scientific research for a functional integrative approach to healing the body. For those of you that don't know, CDE, one of the letters after her name, is a certified diabetes educator. And she's also a renowned expert in the ketogenic diet with over a decade of clinical results, using a unique whole foods approach tailored to support thyroid, adrenal, and hormonal balance. So, I'm excited to dive in and actually ask specific questions about all this. Um, I get a ton of questions about like ketogenic diet for the motherhood transition. So we'll definitely dive into that with her. Let's see what else. What else do we want to share? Allie is a mother and a trailblazer. I would definitely say she's a trailblazer. She has her own supplement line, and her website is Allie Miller RD. Naturally Nourished is another website you can find her at. There's so much stuff she's doing. She has her own podcast, which you might find me on very soon. And basically, it's Allie and Becky, and you'll see Becky. Let me see if I can find. Um, Becky is her sidekick, and I've met Becky in person, and she's wonderful. Becky Yu. They're integrative dietitians together, warrior mamas. I love that. But they're actually quite the dynamic duo. So if you get the chance, go over, listen to them, check them out. I promise you won't be disappointed. Um, they bring a lot to the table, and I know they help so many women and families, in the nourishment world. So give her a minute to get on, and I will give y'all some more updates. Um, There we go. I'll be recording a solo podcast soon about preconception, open to conception. I've gotten some awesome questions about that. If you ever have questions that you want answered on the podcast, definitely email in. Email info@birthfit.com, and Kat will make sure that I get those questions. We've had some amazing questions come through for preconception. So I'm excited to probably have a part one for that topic. Um, as always, some of our partners that we love, Drink Element, the electrolytes, fantastic. We also love Serenity Kids. We also they have awesome snack options, baby food options. As always, we promote breastfeeding at least throughout the initial phase of the little one's life because breast is best. I'm not going to tell you otherwise because it's a fact. Um, but when you start introducing solids to your little one or need some quick snack options, there's Serenity Kids. What else? Berkey filters, we love those. Ergo Baby, Bub's Naturals. I love Bub's Naturals. I put their collagen in my coffee or smoothie almost daily. So really good stuff. And side note, if you're healing postpartum, you need protein, you need collagen. So get on that. Use the code BCommunity, B exclamation community for a 20% discount on Bubs. They're an awesome, awesome company. We also have Butcher Box deals. Go to the website, look at the BirthFit shop, go to products we love, and you'll see all of this stuff in there. Daisy is a fertility awareness tracking method. So go use Daisy. Go get their product. It's great. All right. All right. Okay, Allie just texted me. She's going to be on in just a minute. So grab some tea, coffee, make sure the volume's up in the car. I don't know where you are. Take some deep breaths and start to settle in. Okay. I'll give y'all a minute. Mm. I'm checking the B community programming for today because I need to work out. And I'll share more about my training practices in that preconception podcast. But training today. So, today's a big conditioning day. Those are never my favorite. We always make notes. If on this note, it says if you're in the heavy day or first 2 days of your cycle, you may want to save this day or move through it at about 70% of your rate of perceived exertion or effort. But if you're not, you got to go hard and condition. All right, we always start with the basics. So today I see some hip range of motion, hip ROM, segmental cat-cow, side plank options, squat therapy. That looks good. I need that. Okay, and then mind-body connection. Oh, nice. A little 200-meter run, plate bear complex, dumbbell work. Okay. All right. So it looks like fitness is I'm going to get a healthy dose of fitness today. Mm, okay. Yes. So, Miss Allie, where are you? Sorry, don't talk to myself anymore. I told y'all. Yeah, deals. Cool. We are having a big Mother's Day sale next week. If you are not on our newsletter, get on it because that's where we announce all the things first. go to our website, sign up for the newsletter. You'll be in the know about everything before we even announce it to the general public on Instagram or whatever. And a lot of our programs are going to be 50% off next week. So jump on it. Jump on it. All right. I know the minute I pause out of this, Allie's going to come. So I'm just going to wait. A side note, I don't know if y'all follow Dr. Tina, Drtyna. She's on Instagram, but her email is always really good. And, she sent out one today, and I get questions a lot about, I call it DVOC because who knows who's listening and censoring. But she sent out a really good one today about the long haul of COVID and and the cardiovascular impact of it. And it's interesting. I'm definitely vibing with it. Like the information she puts out, I think it's really good. So if you have questions that I probably won't answer or get to because I'm more concerned, yes, that impacts the work I do. But like the work I do is so heavily focused on preconception, pregnancy, birth, everything in between, movement, strength and conditioning. So I'm not going to do, an extensive deep dive into DVOC and what's going on around kind of the lingering symptoms, but I do have my trusted sources, and Dr. Tina is one of them. So I would check her out. Okay, I think where we go. I see Allie.
Hey, girl.
Hey, Allie.
How you doing?
I'm great. How are you doing? We're recording.
Okay, let's do it.
We're going to jump right in. Welcome to the BirthFit podcast. How are you?
I am stoked to be here and have an awesome conversation.
Yeah. And we get to spend the day together, so
Yeah,
that's even better.
I'm knocking out 4 podcasts today, so I'm just like, let's go.
How did you start your morning? And is it the usual way you start your morning every day?
This morning, I started with a big old lick of salt. I love starting my day off with salt. And so I either do like a little handheld Redmond real salt in my palm and lick it up, or I use Salt Rock. I'm really big fan of this Salt Rock situation. Really important if you have adrenal insufficiency, really good boost of clean energy. And
Mm.
I find it as an awesome way to get started. Then a big old chug of water, like 24 to 30 ounces of water with my morning supplements. And then I did Pilates.
Nice.
Yeah. And now I'm recovering. Always, I try to get within 30 minutes of exercise, a good 20 grams of protein for recovery. So
Yeah, heck
that's what
yeah.
I'm doing now.
Well, I'm glad I asked because I might have to throw the salt thing into my routine. It actually sounds good. Like I love salt more than sweet.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Now,
How
taking
okay,
time with
yeah,
aldosterone, the adrenals, we think of vitamin C for the adrenals because vitamin C plays such a role in cortisol metabolism. But also, we know that when you're craving salt, that's often an indication of adrenal insufficiency. Um,
mm,
and so, the adrenals not only make cortisol, they also make DHEA and aldosterone in the cortex, at least. The medulla makes those catecholamines or stress responding compounds. But when we're craving salt, it's often because the adrenals are taxed or overworked. So, great area to
mm.
hit. Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad I asked. So I told y'all she was a wealth of information. I already gave everybody a heads up.
Cool.
So yeah, let's back it up a little because I want you to share a little bit about your personal story and how you got started doing what you're doing, because I
Sure.
think it's awesome. And you
Yeah.
can share as much or as little of it as you want. And I shared that you were a trailblazer because I truly believe that. So
Well, thank you.
yeah.
So let's see. I am a registered dietitian, a licensed dietitian, and a certified diabetes educator. But I got into the field first in the world of naturopathic medicine. So I went to Bastyr University outside of Seattle, Washington. And when I was there, I entered as a vegan. I had done a stint as a raw vegan prior to that, and thought that I was going to change the world and make everyone, vegan, and that was going to be the best choice. While I was there, I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's thyroiditis.
Oh.
I had really severe neuropathy, which the cold, clammy Seattle did not do well. I have Raynaud's syndrome. And so that was a big flare for autoimmune concerns with my body. I had been relying on a lot of vital wheat gluten and soy
Mm,
in the world of the vegan diet. And so it was as in that timestamp, clean-ish, but
yeah.
definitely like tempeh, which was fermented soy. But again, seitan or the vital wheat gluten, using that in like tacos and such. And I think that really threw my thyroid off significantly.
Mm,
And so I was diagnosed with clinical anemia. I had B12 insufficiency
man.
and I had Hashimoto's thyroiditis. My TPO was over 300. And at that time, I was given handouts on vegetarian sources of iron and, how to boost my B12 with spirulina. And I kind of knew better. I was like, no, I've done enough biochemistry at this point to know that I need
Wow.
some heme iron, not some non-heme iron. And so I need a biological source. As much
Mm,
as I want to add my spinach with lemon, that vitamin C, to turn it from ferric to ferrous form, I knew that the heme is way more bioavailable. And so I started to just make peace with the concept of consuming animals. I actually went to a ranch and saw a cow get slaughtered. They used an air gun in the field, and it was
wow.
super peaceful process. And I was able to start to make peace with this concept of animals being an integral component of the life cycle and of sustainability, and the fact that there's this kind of facade in the green movement of vegetarianism and veganism and carbon sequestering, and how really the only way to reduce our carbon impact is through regenerative agriculture, which relies
Mm,
on ruminants. And so I remember very clearly, I started with raw egg yolks in my green smoothies. And then I was actually gathering oysters like on the Pacific Islands, and
what?
doing that piece where I was like, if I'm a part of the process, I can do it.
Yeah.
But one day my husband was making a grass-fed steak. He was farming at the time, and I was cramming on some exams. And it was like a cartoon character. I like levitated through the kitchen, and before he turned around, like half the steak was gone. I just like went super primal on it, and that's kind of never looked back. From there, I was like, all right, I'm eating meat all the time. And I started to really move towards more of an ancestral diet approach as I was completing my clinical work, working in the Bastyr Clinic and doing some functional medicine modalities. And that's when I really got connected with the work of Weston A. Price and Sally
Mm,
Fallon, and started to really understand the connection of the GAPS diet and the brain gut axis. And that was a huge piece of what I go into in my book, The Anti-Anxiety Diet, within my transition of understanding that animal products can be so nutrient dense, very grounding. In fact, when my child was 2, I always had Peterson's single packs of bacon in her diaper bag, because it was like, okay, if we're gonna have a meltdown, we're gonna get a boost of choline and we're gonna get some quality fat and we're gonna mellow out. That's the best way to help a toddler spaz, is bacon. So
bacon.
that's a cue to all the mamas. Put bacon in your bag and you'll be
I
good.
love
I mean,
it.
I calmed down. Don't you feel better with bacon?
Oh,
It
absolutely.
works.
Absolutely.
So, yes.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, how long, let's say, like, you stopped your vegan diet and started incorporating animal products. I'm curious just how long it took before you saw change in your body, in your physiology, hormones, everything.
Yeah, so the anxiety reduced pretty rapidly. I also at that time, of course, removed the grains, removed
Mm,
soy, of course, removed gluten within the grain family. So it was a combination, and that's really how I see food as medicine. It's equally a kind of double-edged sword of both removal or restriction as well as abundance. And so I think it had a twofold, both removing those pro-inflammatory disruptive compounds, being more mindful of total carbohydrate consumption and blood sugar regularity, and then adding in these bioavailable nutrient sources. And honestly, of course, it was a progression, but
yeah.
I would say absolutely within that first consumption of that steak was I mean, there's a compound in red meat called anandamide, excuse me, and it's in the family of where CBD is in the
Ah,
cannabis plant as far as active bioactive compounds. But anandamide is really high in red meat as well, and it's a very calming compound.
mm,
And so I think that that's a big component that plays a big role with red meat and being grounding. Um, and then, the anemia was rebounded within 3 months.
that's amazing.
And yeah, and I was taking methylated B12 lozenges, of course, as well. But the like overhaul of everything, probably a good 6-month window to a year. Mhm.
Ah, okay. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, that's pretty rapid to shift in 6 to 12 months. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, I mean, and lots of changes, of course, went
Yeah,
into it, as far as the mind-body work and, some strategic supplements as well, and, I think that that's all, a piece of the puzzle, and as a functional
yeah,
medicine practitioner, I'm always trying to determine each individual, what's their Achilles heel,
yeah,
what's their dynamic need unique to their body, their journey, what were the triggers or the antecedents, and how can we really get at that root cause, and it's often an onion effect for sure.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, let's jump to what is it that you do today and how do you work with your clients? What are the services you offer and where people can find you? I know I usually ask that at the end, but I think it's relevant now.
Sure. So, I right now, my clinic in 2017 transitioned to virtual only before the bad season, and so I work
We
with
all have a phrase for the
yes,
bad
yes.
season.
You put too many billions of dollars into a narrative. I just refuse to market
Yeah.
for them. So, before the bad season, we were virtual. Before Zoom was the thing, because my daughter was turning 1, and I wanted the freedom of not having the
Yeah.
overhead of a brick and mortar. I had 7 full-time employees and wanted to kind of scale down my clinic. So I'm still working full-time as a clinician, but all virtual work. And
Right.
so I have clients that I do a 90-minute initial consult with, 45-minute follow-ups. And then as we really get rocking after a 6-month window, we can do like 20-minute touch base and such.
Mm.
I work with probably 80% of my clinic is women.
Yeah.
We work a lot with the HPA axis, which is that hypothalamic pituitary adrenal. And that's a big premise of a lot of the work I do because I really feel one of my big hypotheses, if you will, of the anti-anxiety diet is that whether you're deeming it anxiety or mismanaged stress, if we are in a overdrive of our sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight survival, our whole regulatory parasympathetic system is off.
Mm.
And so that goes into our metabolic health. And so that
Yeah.
impacts people for weight loss goals. That goes into our thyroid health because if we're focusing so much on stimulating the adrenals and the pituitary is making ACTH and not your TSH, your thyroid stimulating hormone, the thyroid gets suppressed.
Mm.
We also see that hormone regulation is impacted by this imbalance in this axis. So fertility,
Yeah.
length of the luteal cycle, so many different factors that we can see there. And then even our sleep cycles, our body temperature regulation, pretty much
Mm.
all of the central elements of balance. And we could even say that, of course, autoimmune conditions would be driven by an imbalance of this HPA axis because the immune system goes in overdrive mode when you're in this chronic fight or flight mode. And then it starts to auto attack an organelle system because it's not sure what the foreign invader is that it's trying to
Yeah.
battle. And it goes into this auto immune hypervigilant response. And so a lot of the work I do starts with assessing that access.
Mm.
Even if someone's coming in with Crohn's disease, or someone's coming in with infertility, or they're coming in with acne, or whatever it is, we're really going to be looking at what's going on in the HPA axis as an entry point. And then I do a really deep dive initial assessment. So we talk about the gut for about 10 to 15 minutes, including, are you dealing with bloating or distension? Does it progress throughout the day, or is it intermittent? We talk
Mhm.
about poop for about 3 to 4 minutes.
That's awesome.
We talk about, belching, flatulence, all the different things. And so I take them through structural health, which is basically neuromuscular and also skeletal. And then we go
Mhm.
through gut, we go through stress access, and then we go through a pretty deep hormone assessment as well. And then from there, I determine, a unique from that consultation, a unique intervention. So maybe some
Mm.
functional labs, maybe some initial supplements, and then some food as medicine strategy.
Cool.
I don't
And
know if I
then
answered. So everything's
yeah,
at AllieMillerRD.com. And
perfect.
that's where my clinic is. And I also have a bunch of virtual programs, and I have a functional supplement line.
Awesome. Yeah, the supplement line, I was sharing a little bit that you started your own supplement line. So how did that come about? Or what was the I remember you telling me in person, but, share with everybody here. What was the motivation behind that?
Yeah. So, the motivation behind that was that when I was in school at the end of my clinical rounds with Bastyr, I took a class called Functional Medicine for Nutrition, or something like that, or Nutrition Perspective on Functional Medicine. And Jeff Bland came and talked to our class, and he's kind of the father. He actually coined the term functional medicine.
Yeah.
Yeah, he is on the board of the Institute of Functional Medicine, and they're out of Gig Harbor, Washington, right by Seattle there.
Wow.
And he came to our class and talked about the work of Linus Pauling, the work of what's called orthomolecular therapy, which basically means mega dose vitamin therapy, or
Yeah.
above the RDA. And yeah, which that's a whole conversation. But he just really blew my mind. I was always really biochemical nerd driven.
Mhm.
And so I was pretty obsessed with the idea that every function of the body has specific nutrients, whether we're talking Krebs cycle, whether we're talking mitochondrial function, whether we're talking about gluconeogenesis. Every function biochemically in the body requires particular nutrients to optimize or
Mm.
function, right? So we're talking about a methylation wheel that
Yeah.
requires methylated folate, or COMT requires SAMe. So I started to kind of think, so these targeted nutrients can basically be a foundational intervention prior to pharmacotherapy, but
Mm.
have a more potent impact and actually work with the way that the body was designed in all of its miraculous pathways,
Yeah.
versus whack-a-mole and symptom managing, and often driving undesired symptoms and this pharmageddon or pharmacotherapy overload,
Yeah.
or polypharmacy as it's called, meaning many drug requirements. I mean, the easiest way to look
Yeah.
at that is in the world of, whether we're talking in anxiety and talking SSRIs or SSRNIs, or if we're talking statin drugs with lipids. Either way, we're going to be working on a receptor site, or we're going to be blocking a biological pathway. Like
Mm.
a statin blocks HMG-CoA reductase. And when it does that, when it blocks an enzyme pathway, it's blocking other building pathways.
Yeah.
Many people are familiar with CoQ10 depletion, but they don't know that also you can be susceptible to low vitamin D and testosterone and serotonin when you inhibit that pathway. So the
Mm.
difference of working with supplements is we're not looking at adjusting a receptor. We're not looking at modifying a biochemical pathway or blocking it. We're looking at supporting what is deficient and upregulating, or kind of working upstream to
Yeah.
support, versus downstream blocking and trying to kind of clean up the mess.
Yeah. Yeah, I like how you that beautiful explanation. I feel like some people do get lost when they start, you know, using whack-a-mole in the supplement world. Like they go to Whole
Fair.
Foods or
Yeah.
whoever, and I love how you said like this affects this and the upstream and the downstream and everything.
Yeah.
Um, it all matters.
Yeah. Well, and the problem I think because the problem with anything, whether it's a functional natural approach or an allopathic conventional approach, it's
Yeah,
when we get algorithm focused. So
yeah,
it's like this says this, go through this protocol.
yep,
And unfortunately, we see that a lot in functional medicine, especially
yeah,
those that didn't have deep dive training, but they're maybe doing this as a secondary career. They watched
yeah,
a module or went to a
yeah,
seminar on leaky gut, and then all of a sudden everyone has leaky gut,
yeah,
So I watch out for that. And then I also think that in the natural medicine world, there are certain things that are demonized that generally speaking, again, everything has its place. There's a balanced symphony within the body of expression.
mm,
And again,
yeah,
there's no rhyme and reason to always say suppress or reduce. And two things that come to mind in that are estrogen and cortisol.
mm.
Everyone talks about estrogen dominance,
I'm glad you brought that up. Yes.
and then the other one is cortisol, belly.
Yeah, yeah,
And so I never would blindly, I think to take like a broccoli sprout extract, for instance, if we're thinking about potential estrogen dominance, that would be okay. But you would not want to blindly take something like diindolylmethionine or DIM. DIM could very greatly suppress your estrogen to the point where
mm,
that's unfavorable for cardiovascular health, where that's unfavorable for bone health, for fertility, for hormone balance.
mm,
And so
yeah,
and secondary to that, I would say some people that experience symptoms of estrogen dominance actually have normal estrogen levels, but it is the insufficient progesterone
yeah,
that actually creates that estrogen dominance. And so it's a
yeah,
relative estrogen dominance, more of a secondary than a primary estrogen
yeah,
dominance. And so that is addressed completely different than someone with a primary estrogen dominance, which maybe has xenoestrogens from plastic or exposed to endocrine disruptors or has some blocked biochemical pathways and they're not excreting estrogen maybe with a daily bowel movement. So there are factors where it
mm.
could be primary. But I think
That's
that
so
that's
important what you said,
yeah.
it could be a primary estrogen dominance thing or a secondary, and I do think, when people are trying to dye their way through their own health, they're like, "Oh, estrogen dominance, okay, that's me," and
And then
then
they
they
just go lower the better.
yeah,
So we just recently on my podcast, Naturally Nourished, did 2 episodes back to back. One, I was gonna do 1 episode, but it was just too much content, and I was gonna call it "Estrogen: The Good, the Bad, the Ugly," and just kind of give the whole story because a lot of people, again, just kinda get shoehorned.
tunnel vision, yeah,
Yep. So we did 1 episode on why you need estrogen, and then 1 episode on what to consider with estrogen dominance so that people could
awesome.
kind of understand that.
Yeah. So go check that out, y'all. What do you see, and I'm probably gonna jump kind of all over the place here, but, for women that are in the preconception period, and this has been a huge topic for BirthFit recently, probably because, I'm like, "Hey, guys, we might be open to conception soon," and so everybody's jumps on it with me, but, what do you think are the biggest hurdles that women in our world, our society face right now, or the biggest obstacles that you see maybe coming through your clinic?
So one for sure is managing that stress HPA axis because
Yeah.
many women that are in that sympathetic fight or flight excess output mode or survival type
Yeah.
expression again will have a imbalance in their parasympathetic. And if we're talking about sexual hormones, the hypothalamus stimulates our hormone production, but if it's driving the adrenals, it's stimulating the adrenals instead. And
Mhm.
the pituitary is really the star of the show for hormone balance and fertility.
Mm.
For instance, I always like to look at when someone's dealing with infertility prolactin levels.
Mm.
Prolactin is made by the pituitary gland, as is oxytocin. And we tend to think
Yeah.
of these more in the birth process and
Yeah.
in the postpartum process, but they play a huge role with fertility as well. For instance, if
Mm.
prolactin levels are elevated, that's a high indicator of pituitary dysfunction or HPA axis imbalance. We know that from the pituitary, we make our LH and our FSH. So what
Mhm.
regulates the menstrual cycle, as well as if you are in fact ovulating,
Yeah.
and getting a long enough luteal cycle to retain and allow healthy implantation of a fertilized egg.
Mhm.
And that's also where we'll see that progesterone suppression with HPA axis
Yeah.
imbalance. And we know, of course, the importance of progesterone for that first trimester and healthy pregnancy outcomes.
Huge.
So that's a huge part of the puzzle, I think. And I run a panel in my clinic, which looks at a 4-point salivary assessment. So it looks at cortisol and DHEA.
Mm.
Often we'll see high cortisol or high DHEA being a area where we can have issues with conception,
Mhm.
especially high DHEA. That can
Oh,
be indicative of PCOS often,
okay.
but not always. Um,
Mm.
so, you could do actually an assessment of PCOS at that time if you have an elevated DHEA. But the best way to get your DHEA levels down is through, of course, stress support and meditation, parasympathetic activity like walking, using adaptogens, but also keto diet. The keto diet will metabolize that excess DHEA. And so when I see that for an individual that's looking for fertility, we go super tight on wringing their carbs out, bringing them at like 30 grams a day, higher biological protein, and really high fat, especially if they have hormone suppression.
Mm.
So if I see that also in the saliva, so we look at the adrenals, the cortisol, 4-point, and DHEA. We look at their estradiol, which is the main estrogen.
Yeah.
We look at their estrone and then their estriol. So all 3 forms of estrogen.
Yeah.
We look at their progesterone and their testosterone, and that's all in the saliva. And then I do a urinary assessment within this panel, and that looks at neurotransmitters, which is really
Oh,
important because
yeah.
someone could be stressed and wired and also stressed and tired. And
Mm.
again, that's why I really like to test and not guess. If we're feeling like, you know what, I am a stressed out person, even if I feel chill, I know I'm wearing
Woo!
way too many hats and I'm overextended. So some people don't like to admit,
Yeah.
anxiety or stress, but let's just admit sometimes that we're
It's like under there
overwhelmed.
somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah. And like, let's just admit that maybe we're taking on too much or that we
Yeah.
just got through a shmamic and there's a lot of stuff going on emotionally and interpersonally and whatnot. So the neurotransmitters are really cool because it looks at your catecholamines, which are also made by the adrenals, which is your dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine. So these are huge because dopamine would be a big marker for an individual that's ADHD, a
Mhm.
big marker for someone that has some social anxiety
Mm.
or paranoia, even at times. The epinephrine, which is the metabolite to down from dopamine, also made by the adrenals, is in layman's term adrenaline. So we
Yeah.
see people that run low cortisol, burned out DHEA, but super high epinephrine. And so you'd manage that person differently than someone who also has low epinephrine because the individual that's low in both their saliva and neurotransmitters, we want to give them adrenal glandular to rev them up
Mm.
and really be
Okay.
a pillar of a process. But if their epinephrine's up and we gave them a glandular, they're going to feel like, they're holding on
Oh,
to an
yeah.
old school lawnmower and they're just like, ugh. And that's that stressed and wired, stressed and tired. They don't have
Yeah.
the corticosteroid resilience, but yet their neurotransmitters are still in this wiry survival
Mhm.
spin. And so I love looking at that because I think you need both to really look at a true picture of HPA axis. And then we do look at serotonin and GABA, which is our
Yeah.
landing gear for our stress response. And then we even look at glycine, which is a great compound when we're talking about neuromuscular tension in the body. And we look at glutamate and a couple others in there. And so that's kind of a starting point or a micronutrient assessment when I'm working with an individual that's in this idea of like, I want to grow a super baby and I want to make sure my
Yeah.
body's ready to rock kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because if you are clinically deficient in progesterone, it can take a whole year to get your body's access back on, depending on
Oh,
how severe.
okay.
Are we in stage 3 or stage 2 or stage 1 of adrenal
Oh,
insufficiency?
okay.
So I don't, depending. And so for many women, using I used bioidentical progesterone. I still use it, even outside
People
of,
love it.
yeah. I mean, It's a game change. Becky and I laugh when we record the podcast and we're like, oh no, are you off your progesterone now? We're going to have so much brain fog. When we both are the week that we're both on, we're like, let's go. I mean, I sleep deeper. It is a great natural diuretic, so less fluid retention in the body. And for
Yeah.
people like me that do the best you can do, but like I'm 1 day pre-cycle, so I have clearly some androgenic stuff going on here. My body is super high adrenal. Like it just is.
Yeah.
And I do everything I can to be in the most mellow
Yeah.
mode of the me. But as y'all can tell, like I can get lion out of cage. I'm someone that had a DHEA in 1,000 before I got pregnant with my daughter. And that's when I first, and it's supposed to be ideally range like 150 in saliva.
Oh.
So I was off the charts, super high, like chest bumping people. Like I think of that as like an Incredible Hulk marker. And it took a lot of transition of course, like work-life balance. Doing the keto
Mm.
diet was a big indicator because
Okay.
I mean, and we can talk about that as its own
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
fertility. But that, and then I did a really great gut cleanse. And I think that those three things I attribute really greatly to finally, after a year of being open to it, things sticking and going forward.
That's cool.
Yeah,
Wow. Okay. So yeah, let's talk about the ketogenic diet a little more
sure.
because
In
that's your jam.
preconception mode, or
Yeah.
yeah, and we can also talk about is it safe during pregnancy and
Yeah.
what happens in the first,
Each
second, third
chapter.
trimester. Okay. So it's a very appropriate if the DHEA is elevated because
Mm.
again, DHEA gets metabolized down through ketone production. And so if we see that, and we often see with PCOS insulin resistance. So that's another piece of the puzzle of why keto is really, really great for
Mm.
that grouping of women. Now, if you don't know where those levels are, but you have belly fat or you have blood sugar dysregulation, it would absolutely still be a really good fit for you. And if you think about it, when we're talking about infertility, the first drug that's often offered, we're either going to think of Clomid, which is
Yeah.
basically a slingshot to the pituitary gland, right? Or we're thinking metformin. Metformin is very
Yep.
commonplace use, and metformin is a diabetic drug.
I was
So,
just gonna say that. Like, what, isn't
so
it diabetes?
why not use your diet to bring
Yeah.
your blood sugar levels lower versus using a drug that impacts your liver,
Yeah.
drives GI distress, and is an oral hypoglycemic? Why not get that outcome by pulling carbs out of your diet? Hello, this
Yeah.
is just, and then the same thing with the pituitary part. That's kind of a cool mechanism. When you make ketones, ketones cross the blood-brain barrier. And so that's the unique mechanism.
Mm.
A lot of people that are in the personal training world or whatnot, they'll say, calories in, calories out. It doesn't matter.
Oh
Macros
god,
don't
yeah.
matter. And I mean, those people I can't have a good conversation with civilly or I'll start chest bumping them. But the very different mechanism is that ketones are a biological marker that can be measured in the blood, urine, and in the breath, right? So you're actually
Dang.
producing something. There's a metabolic shift occurring when you
Yeah.
are in a state of nutritional ketosis. That's non-debatable. It's measurable, right? And so these ketones have an actual influence functionally in the body. They cross the blood-brain barrier and they actually interact with the hypothalamus. If we think of the history in the medical world of nutritional ketosis, it was used as a tool for epilepsy. And that's because ketones have a GABAergic effect to them. GABA is the main landing gear inhibitory mellowing out compound in our neurochemistry. And so for individuals that run HPA axis imbalance, GABA, when upregulated in the brain, vents the steam train or the anxiety or the panic or that fight or flight response.
Mm.
So there's a super grounding neurochemical effect from being into a state of nutritional ketosis most times. And I'll tell you the caveat of who it's not a good fit for. Make sure I get there.
Great.
So most times it's very anxiolytic or anxiety reducing. Um,
Okay.
because it crosses the blood-brain barrier and docks with the hypothalamus, it also works like a slingshot to the pituitary. So it has both the mechanisms of metformin and Clomid with a
Yeah.
diet therapy. So we've seen that ketosis can actually impact your LH and your FSH levels and create a better balanced ratio.
That's
It's been
amazing.
clinically assessed. So we have so many keto miracle babies that like someone might because it's like they weren't really, they were just kind of like gave
Yeah.
up or said, oh, this maybe isn't the time. And then it's like, oh, Okay. Because the body has especially if they were eating maybe a little bit of a higher carb diet and it's a
Yeah,
remarkable adjustment for their system. We see some really awesome outcomes because of those mechanisms of action.
yeah.
And it's anti-inflammatory, generally speaking. So
Well, that just makes sense, like, God, and like you said, Clomid, metformin, that's a whole rabbit hole you get started down. Oh my god.
yeah, yeah, and it's wild. I mean, it's really such a disservice that people are put on those medications without given any education or opportunity to use diet or lifestyle, and
Absolutely.
also often even without hormone testing, which is truly
Yes.
a disservice. I can't tell you how many, miscarriages could be prevented if the woman knew where her progesterone levels were at, obviously.
Oh my gosh,
Um,
yes.
and so that's a really big, I think, disservice and frustration of mine when I'm like,
Totally.
yelling from the mountains.
So
Um,
who is it not good for?
It's not good for individuals that are, over restricting their calories,
Okay.
over exercising, and
So
over caffeinating.
CrossFitters.
Who? Everyone?
Said CrossFitters.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, well, it just depends. When you're doing a lot of
Super
glycolytic
CrossFitters.
activity, like super heavy lifting and such,
Yeah.
you probably want to replete your glycogen stores. You're likely gonna have more metabolic flexibility, so you can probably make ketones at a more liberated carb
Mm,
restriction than someone who isn't doing heavy lifting.
yeah.
And so I definitely, within my clinic and within my scope and the programs that I run, we take this, of course, individualized approach of metabolic flexibility. It's not like
Mm,
everyone has to be at this said grams of carbs restriction. Of course,
yeah.
we have a starting point to get everyone in, and then we kind of see what does your body tolerate while still maintaining that hybrid function of using
Mm,
both fat and glucose as fuel. But the ones that I watch out for are the type A'ers, which are like probably the majority of our clinic anyway. So you just have to be
they find
mindful.
you.
Yeah, it doesn't mean it's inappropriate. It just means that you have to be really mindful with them to make sure that they eat enough.
Yeah.
Because ketosis can have a little bit of a natural limiting consumption, be that, we tend to not overeat protein. I mean,
Yeah,
really.
women in general, they, like, limit food, limit protein.
Yeah. And so, and protein's very satiating. And so it can be a little bit more difficult to get even over, for some individuals, 12 to 1400 calories when eating tight keto because they just get burned out. And ketones, when they cross that blood brain barrier, they actually create more satiety and satiation. And so we don't
Uh,
have that blood sugar roller coaster of the insulin creating that blood sugar drop, which then creates hunger. So we're not
mhm.
getting that feedback of the hangry kind of thing. When we're in keto, we're super chill, and so that means
Mhm.
for busy individuals, they plow through lunch. They skip, and it might not be a restrictive diet intentionally. It might be I'm a high stress individual and I didn't think to eat kind of thing.
Right,
And that's what I
right.
see often as an issue. Because you need that fat and I'm a huge kind of more Mediterranean keto approacher where we
Mm,
still get a lot of phytocompounds and antioxidants. And so I try to ensure that when we step into keto, we're not also intermittent fasting. When we step into, it's like take on one, it's this whole concept of allostatic load, which is
yeah,
the stress threshold of the body. And I liken that to like a wardrobe in the sense that like, okay, if you're bringing in ketosis, like you got to get rid of that, dress from last season or whatever. So you have to think about like, okay, I'm going to cut my caffeine to 1 cup of coffee because I'm doing keto, which itself can have, although it's very grounding, it is a stressor to the body, just like hormesis with
mm,
weightlifting, just like, various things that can
yeah,
be health supporting, like intermittent fasting, sauna, cryotherapy, but we can't do it all at once or the body's going to go, what? This is crazy.
yeah,
So
yeah,
that's what I watch out for basically is letting people do keto as their main change. And then I say, okay, you want to ramp up your exercise. Now let's play with your metabolic flexibility.
yeah,
Or, oh, now you want to fast. Let's play with, we kind of try to,
yeah. I feel like I see or observe a lot of women that dabble in keto and intermittent fasting at the same time. What
yeah.
are your yeah.
Well, and it's natural to do so because of that appetite
Mm,
regulation or that
yeah,
natural satiety. But I think that I at least like you to be 4 weeks in to nutritional ketosis before you're going more than 12 hours. I'm cool with a 12-hour fast no matter what. And I think that that's an ideal. But a 16 to 18-hour fast, I think, is a little bit more aggressive. And so at that
Mm,
juncture, we want to weigh out. Maybe you need the eggs with the broccoli sprouts and
yeah,
the bacon and a side salad of arugula at 10 a.m. instead of waiting till 1, and so we kind
yeah,
of work it that way.
got it.
Mhm.
So pregnancy
Okay.
and ketogenic.
Yeah. So, I mean, if we think ancestrally, we know
Yeah,
that ketosis is safe for pregnancy because that's how we are here. That's how our
yeah.
ancestors survived. Hunter gatherer
Okay, that
time.
was, like, what my intuition was saying too, like
like like we're clearly here, right? So like something's fine. But a pregnant woman is actually 3 times more likely to produce ketones than non-pregnant females. And
Wow,
yeah, and it is estimated, I think it's like 30% that fetal energy is made from ketones.
that's
So
amazing.
yeah. And so there are, actual metabolic processes that ketones are very supportive, can enhance cognitive development, brain development. And we do know in the first trimester that insulin levels are higher than the second and third. And so I'll often have people. So first off, I guess the fact that pregnant women are more likely, that means that a pregnant woman at 75 grams of carbs could likely produce ketones, whereas a non-pregnant woman maybe needs to go to 45 grams of carbs to produce ketones, if that makes sense. And it's
Yeah.
because of the insulin shifts and metabolic shifts that insulin goes up in that first trimester because you're accelerating growth of the baby.
Mm,
And so we're
makes
trying to
sense.
surge, growth, and it's an anabolic, insulin's an anabolic hormone. And so, I always say, no matter what with pregnancy, I don't want you to restrict. So I don't want you to think about like, I can't have this. I want you to eat with, food as medicine goals of abundance. But don't be fearful of
Yeah,
maintaining a moderate carb restriction and know that, likely it is going to be happening in your body regardless. Now, of course, not with gestational diabetes. We're not going to see that development and the fetal fuel be as high of ketones, like that 30%. They're likely going to be in a much suppressed state. And that might be some of the unfavorable outcomes that we see with gestational diabetes or blood sugar dysregulation. Whether that prevents full term pregnancy
mhm,
or preeclampsia, or whether that drives, macrosomia and larger baby in the womb, and that's basically like a kid or an adult getting too much carb, right? Macrosomia
yeah,
is an obese baby,
yeah,
essentially, and that happens when we aren't carb controlled.
mhm,
And so I would argue that nutritional ketosis is, I don't want to use the word normal, but that it is absolutely healthy,
yeah,
that it has been used in the test of time, and that there's not a concern for baby. The big concern is, are you nourishing yourself and getting enough calories? And I generally have most pregnant women at somewhere between 60 to 90 grams of carbs, which is not even that restrictive. But some pregnant women are having 300 plus, So,
yeah,
and
totally.
and within that first trimester is the time to give yourself a little bit more liberation of carb. And then you want
Yeah,
to really tighten it up as you get into the second and third trimester. And that's again why when we watch for gestational diabetes, and the insulin levels do go down in that second and third, it's really that surge in the first. And so if you're someone that's been eating more paleo or more keto style eating, and you're craving
like
sweet
sour
potatoes and
yeah,
fruit and such in the first trimester, I think that's absolutely legit. You just want to
mm,
make sure you're pairing your carbs with protein and fat. So I'm never a
yeah,
fan of a naked carb, like just eating a peach. I'd rather you have that with heavy whipping cream, or which is
ooh,
delicious, hello.
yeah,
Or like
that sounds
getting
good.
nut butter with your apple slices, or using coconut oil with your sweet potato and having it with a
Yeah,
kind of thing.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
That makes complete sense, like, 1st trimester versus 2nd and 3rd. Love that.
Yep, and it
So
can help with nausea too, if individuals deal with nausea. Often that's like the comfort foods, we crave a little bit more carbs
yeah.
than that, and
What do you think, do you think within the 1st trimester and, nausea and morning sickness, even though it's all day sickness for some, what are your thoughts around that? Because heard, it's just bad luck. It's related to nutrition. It's related to minerals. It's related to so many different things.
Yeah. It's a girl versus a boy or whatever, right?
Yeah, yeah, all the old wives' tales.
Yeah. So I think often it does trend with that insulin response.
Mm,
And so I think that that's worth looking into as far as like are you going hypoglycemic because of those insulin surges? And then because you are having retching or vomiting, you're not replenishing and you're going even lower blood sugar. So I love to work with electrolytes. I love
mm,
to liberate carbs at that time. I will add an additional B complex on top of my
mm,
multi-avail mama because we see a lot of the B vitamins playing a role. And I
mhm.
always have a woman test their progesterone at that juncture as well. I think it has to do
Oh.
also with those that are running a little bit lower progesterone.
Oh,
Yeah.
I haven't heard that one. I like that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, sometimes we'll go rogue if their OBGYN or, clinic isn't wanting to test their progesterone. I'll order that for them, of course. And usually you would use a progesterone suppository once you are in a active stage of pregnancy, positive
Mm,
pregnancy test, and we know you're low. But you can also use a transdermal bioidentical. And so I was doing 20 milligrams transdermal bioidentical preconception, just days 12 through 28 of my cycle. You work that
yeah,
ovulation luteal.
yeah.
And then once I got the positive pregnancy test, I went up to 40 milligrams for the first 6 weeks, and then went up to 60 milligrams from that week 7 to 12. And then all was good, kind of just getting through that window.
Interesting. I like that. Okay. And then what about postpartum? Like, so in BirthFit, we think of postpartum like, okay, you have the first 30 days,
Yes.
and that's a whole beast.
Yeah.
And then we do, okay, month 2, 3, 4, and 5 is like rehab and training. And
Yes.
then you kind of graduate from us and then go about the world. But that's not until, month 5 or 6 postpartum. But
Yeah.
that whole first month
The
is
whole
like,
fourth trimester that no one tells
yeah,
us
yeah,
about. So as far as the world of like keto and carb
yeah,
restriction, most women in that third trimester, I keep at like 60 grams of carbs. So we kind of
yeah,
again ratchet down from that peak.
yep,
But I really allow more liberated carbs because the biggest thing is for the body to regulate pain, inflammation, and get back to that safety mode for healthy breast milk production.
yeah,
So I generally say until your breastfeeding has fully connected with babe, you're not dealing with any drama with tongue tie or
yeah,
letdown or anything in that space. Usually it could be week 3, could be week 4, could be week
yeah,
6 for some. But once you feel like you are in sync with babe and you guys are rock and roll and feeds are good, we're not dealing with mastitis, output
yeah.
is good, and everything's kind of in alignment consistently, then that's a time that you absolutely can go a little bit deeper into ketosis.
Ah,
And many women like that because of the keto high and the anxiety reducing
yeah,
element and just the cognitive clarity that they get. So it's usually a goal, but I generally say, yeah, let's just stay at a little bit more liberated. The body needs to feel safe, and
mm.
then we can kind of ranch it down. That's how we approach
Is
that.
it true that, well, I know breast milk changes, but it's more ketosis, like, um
Fattier?
yes, yeah, I was like,
Yeah,
"What was the word I was
absolutely.
looking for?"
Yeah, sorry, I didn't really jump in there. But yeah,
Got it.
there could be a higher yes, there's a lot of research on composition of breast milk, and
Yeah,
honestly, it's not super consistent. I haven't seen like a randomized clinical trial where they've looked at a feeding
yeah,
study of ketone production, but I do know as a kind of case study and testimonial from clinic that babies tend to sleep really well with high fat profile milk. And like the keto mamas will see outcomes in that sense as far as, you know, sleep patterns and what seems to be satiety signals from
yeah,
babe and such. And I mean, I know that from bringing in solids and baby led weaning, our first food that we worked on with my daughter was avocado. And then from there, we went to wild salmon. And then from wild salmon, we went to beef. And then we brought in berries. And so it was a very
awesome.
clean, simple fats.
Yeah.
And she spent 2 weeks because that whole pincer grip and avocado is pretty slippery. So I don't know if that was nice of us, but I mean, it is
Like,
like, how do I pick that up? Yeah. And so, maybe in hindsight, I would start with salmon actually.
mm,
And another recommendation, because it's just a little bit easier to grab and less slippery per se. But I think the fat and the protein are really important. And we would always do like a fat bomb feed prior to that sleep overnight. And
yeah,
I mean, I can count on a handful, knock on wood, the amount of times that my daughter woke up in the middle of the night. I mean, she was a 10-hour at bed sleeper from like 4 months, excuse me, on.
that's
Um,
amazing.
yeah. And the OBGYN, the pediatrician was like, I was the nervous mom. I was like, I don't know if this is good. And I was like, should I wake her up? He's like, shh, no, don't wake her up. Like she knows what she needs. And so I think that's always important too.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, okay, last question, because I know we gotta get rolling. What are your thoughts? A lot of people are concerned with thyroid as it goes through pregnancy, postpartum, and I know it changes. But, yeah, I know we kinda went through keto, like, prenatal pregnancy,
Yeah.
through the whole chapters, but, yeah, could you give a rundown of what your thoughts are
Yeah.
just, like,
So,
around thyroid health?
well, what's totally another disservice that we see in conventional medicine is often only a TSH will be assessed.
Yeah, one thing.
Yeah. So that's a pituitary marker. And again,
Mm,
as I connected, the pituitary is such an important player with fertility and hormone regulation. And so in the early stage of pregnancy, the pituitary is doing a lot. We often will see TSH trending up in that first trimester. And some docs will want to jump right away on synthroid for an individual that's
yeah,
been euthyroid or balanced thyroid their whole, history.
uh,
Um,
yeah,
and so I always say, before considering an intervention, that it would be important to get your free T3 and your free T4. So T4 is like the precursor or inactive form. T3 is the active form of the thyroid hormone. And what we're looking to do is actually assess the function of the gland, not the feedback of the gland. When you're looking at
mm,
TSH, you're looking at what your brain is putting out as a feedback mechanism. And again, if the pituitary in the brain has 75 other things to do, it may get a little bit lack on producing
yeah,
TSH or reading the thyroid appropriately because it's just not maybe the most priority. So that's a thing. So I think definitely checking free T3 and free
yeah,
T4 are important. For some individuals, they do require support, but I would consider first really ensuring you're getting ample iodine in the diet. So seafood would be huge. Nori
mm,
sheets would be important. Tyrosine is the amino acid that builds thyroxine and makes your thyroid hormone. So it's an amino acid. So protein rich foods, dark poultry is really high in tyrosine. So doing chicken thighs 3 times a week could be a really great way to ramp that up.
yeah,
And I would always ask for a retest before a medication intervention because TSH can change by the day. It's not a
oh,
biomarker that has a longevity, the half-life is very short. And so you could take your TSH on a Tuesday and you could take it on a Wednesday and be 4.5 and 2.7, and that's why it's really
that's cool.
important to look at the other markers.
Mm. I just had somebody come in my office and tell me that this was postpartum related, that they did labs postpartum and they got prescribed thyroid medication because their TSH was off.
Yeah.
And I was like, "You're 3 months postpartum. What are
Yeah.
you doing?" Like, so when do you think stuff sorta
And again,
levels back?
postpartum, again, remember that pituitary makes your oxytocin and your prolactin, which are
Yeah,
obviously the priority in those first 3
yeah,
months, because your body's like, "What am I doing here? I gotta make this stuff. I gotta feed this
yeah.
human." And so again, the thyroid kinda takes a back burner,
What the heck?
during that time, and I think that's okay. I think that that's an order of demand of the capacity of
Yeah.
the body kinda thing. Um, I think maca is a great thing to consider. Maca works directly on the pituitary. It's a Peruvian root. It's a tuber vegetable. And so that's something that can be a good adaptogen and tonify that pathway. And then
Mm,
I just work also, again, if we're talking about dysregulation in the pituitary, we want to support that HPA axis. And
mm,
so I have a formula that I use often, Calm and Clear, in my line. That would be a great postpartum. We can't use that during active pregnancy because
okay.
of the ashwagandha in there. But there are safe adaptogen options out there. So, really working with adaptogens would be a good consideration, and making sure that you're also eating enough, because that can throw things off as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. I I love that. All right. I kind of hit on things kind of all over the place. Is there anything I missed that you wanted to touch on today?
Hmm.
I know.
Oh, well, the only thing I would say is, of my, again, perspective with nutritional ketosis, it's more of, like I said, a Mediterranean keto. It's more of
Oh,
a getting back to ancestral trends of eating. So it's very quality focused, meaning, pasture raised, grass fed
yeah.
meats. Getting, like I said, high amounts of herb seasoning spices. I emphasize
Mm,
2 to 3 cups of leafy greens per day. So, I'm sipping on a smoothie that has lacinato kale in it and full fat coconut milk, and a third cup of frozen mango, because after an exercise hit for me, and ginger is in here and a little bit of
oh,
maca.
I love ginger.
But that to me is metabolically active keto, so there's no yes
Yeah.
or no food list of like can't have. It's all
Yeah.
about the dial of, what the body tolerates based on its level of insulin resistance, based on your level of stress, based on your muscle activity, which is what brings glucose into the cells independent of insulin. And so we definitely
Awesome.
take that approach. And the other thing that's super unique, is that I'm very opposed to non-caloric sweeteners. And so most of the time, any product that has the word keto in it, generally speaking, is going to have erythritol or monk fruit or stevia, or, there's so many. Allulose is the new kid on the block.
Yeah.
And so I have an issue with these because they are hyper palatable. So they trick our palate into thinking that sweet is safe. So no
Mhm.
matter where you are, you're never going to break up with the abusive boyfriend of sugar. You're going to still want
Yeah.
that abusive boyfriend. So like if you're in Starbucks, or if you're in at a baby shower or wherever, you're going to want the cupcake, or at a wedding, right? Like you want
Yeah.
the sweet because you're conditioning yourself that sweet is safe. I think that that's an issue. And then there's actually a physiological mechanism. There's two.
Mhm.
GLP-1, which is our taste receptor in our tongue. GLP-1 drives up insulin, even independent of a glucose response. So the taste receptor of sweet can drive an insulin response, which again is not favorable in most
Yeah.
settings. And then we often will get hypoglycemia, or we'll overeat. We see time and time again individuals that consume diet products or non-caloric sweeteners overconsume calories because of that dysregulation in their palate. And
Mm,
the third thing is that these are bacteriostatic and they mess with the microbiome. So yeah,
that's important.
yeah. So and that's a whole another conversation. But even stevia has been shown to sterilize lactobacillus and bifido, and that's a
Oh,
huge piece of our body's need for balancing our estrobolome, which is our estrogen metabolism of the microbiome, for producing serotonin and GABA, those landing gear, compounds for our stress response.
yep.
Of course, immunological and even nutrient production, as well as absorption, all require a robust microbiome. So
Mm.
I'm really against them. I really kind of push people to go savory in their keto and
Mm.
not try to recreate their past standard American diet products. Like
Yeah.
you're never going to see a keto donut on my blog, for instance. Um, this is not going to happen. But you will see me use in my collagen zucchini muffins a whole banana, God forbid, in 12 muffins, because a 12th of a banana
Yeah.
is not going to kick anyone out of ketosis.
Yeah, that
Um,
makes sense.
yeah, so we use like, dates, we use
Ooh,
grade B maple syrup, we use raw unfiltered
nice.
honey. If I'm using a sweet, I'm just going to adjust the amount in my recipe. And I talk about that a lot as an entry for people that want to learn more about that in my book, The Anti-Anxiety Diet Cookbook, which that is more of a standard cookbook, not as nerdy as the Anti-Anxiety Diet, which is the nonfiction science read. But people are shocked to see that I chop up dates in this cauliflower salad that has this beautiful like champagne vinegar and a bunch of fresh herbs and pine nuts.
Mm.
And it's like that little bit of that salt with the acid, with the crunch of the roasted
Yeah,
cauliflower, and little, like there's 3 dates that we micro chop into 6 cups of cauliflower. And so again, it's like it just provides a really nice balance. It still maintains a
sounds
savory
awesome.
palate. And I don't prescribe to that, that's not keto, that's
Yeah.
the rule
Yeah.
of yes and no food lists.
Yeah. It seems like, I mean, with anything, people want to get so black and white
Yes.
about things.
Yes, that like myopic tunnel vision.
Yeah. Yeah. Ooh, well, this has been fascinating, and yeah, I love it, and I told everybody, I told y'all that she was a smarty pants. Alright, remind people where they can find you at, and,
Okay, so everything is at alliemillerrd.com. The podcast is called Naturally Nourished. The YouTube channel is called Naturally Nourished, and the YouTube channel is more like 5 to 15 minute videos of bite
cool.
size. So that's very digestible for many if they're looking to just get a taste of nerdy.
Yeah,
The podcast is pretty deep dive. And then on social media, it's at Allie Miller RD. And we're trying to
awesome.
get me out of jail as we speak.
Oh, yeah. Shadow banned like the rest of the good folks.
Yes, my badge of honor. Yes.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom and practices. Now, I'm like, I wanna sign up for a consult,
All
so
right, let's do it. I just came
yay.
back from horseback. I'm horseback riding, and I was like, I
Yay.
don't know. My sacral spine was
Yay.
trying
Oh,
to find
yeah.
itself. The
Yeah.
parasympathetic part of the riding is amazing, but I'm
It's
like,
so yeah.
as I'm sitting on a yoga ball,
So
like
good.
I try to do my hip circles and get
Good.
myself back in, but I probably need some of that. So we could do some.
Yeah. Aw. Well, it's been good chatting with you, and, I'll get this up soon, and I'll
Awesome.
see you soon.
Okay, my
Uh,
pleasure. Take care. Bye, all.
bye, Allie.